Hi. So this is the last session. That's great. My name's Lea. Welcome to the last talk. So I'm currently a graduate student of Innovation Design Engineering at the Royal College of Art and Imperial College in London. And on the side, I write for Ray Vanderlyck, and I tech edit and do some video course stuff as well. This is my first time at UIKonf, even though I've wanted to come before. So I'm really excited to be here, and I've been having an absolute blast so far because everyone's been lovely and amazing, so thank you. So around this time, 4 years ago, if you had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, the answer would definitely have been iOS developer. I was well on my way. It was 2015, and I had just graduated with a degree in computer science from Grinnell College in Iowa. And I was about to meet this guy in June. So I had a job lined up to work on a mobile app for a company called Rent the Runway in New York City, and I couldn't wait to get started. But a lot has happened since then. I went from being an absolute mobile app fangirl to feeling quite disillusioned by creating and using mobile technologies in general. I started to realize how dependent on my phone I was becoming, and since I now had a backstage view into knowing how apps used by millions of people got made, it became quite clear to me that this dependence didn't just happen entirely on its own, but rather as a byproduct of questionable data-driven decisions aimed at monetizing user attention. But before you leave this room in a hurry, I'm not here to deliver a passionate rant about how mobile is ruining our lives. There are a lot of people doing that already, so I'm here instead to share my perspective on mobile development, how it started, how it changed, how it evolved over the years, and how I've ultimately realized that mobile development is an incredible way to solve problems, as long as your decisions are driven by empowering rather than overpowering your users. All right. So first, I'm going to tell you about how I fell in love with mobile apps. It all started way back when, around the year 2000, when I got a stable internet connection and discovered Neopets. For those of you who don't know it, Neopets is a virtual pet website, but the pets themselves don't really matter. Everything else does, like having lots of Neopoints, money, trophies, avatars. And the one thing that can really set you apart from the other players is having a killer user lookup page. And thankfully, our friends at Neopets were kind enough to let us tweak it through plain HTML and CSS. And creating these user lookups was a whole new world for me. So I got into graphics with Corel Draw and Photoshop to make it look good, and then got into coding to make it all work and be interactive. And this was the first time I was making something. And I knew exactly how it worked, and I could control exactly how people saw it and used it. And that was just mind-blowing to me. You can make it very simple for people to use, like this one. Or you can make it very hard, like sticking your entire user lookup in this tiny box and really make people struggle. And I was starting to grasp this fuzzy idea of the importance of making things usable and accessible when I got my first ever feedback, which was complaints from people that this sucked. So I made sure not to do that again. So these were my humble beginnings of getting interested in UX design and interaction design. So in college, I kind of naturally gravitated towards computer science, especially because in the intro course, we learned to script images like these with Scheme. And if you don't know Scheme, it's a functional programming language based on minimalism, simplicity, and extendability, which, seeing that Swift is built on similar principles, I now appreciate, but I really didn't back then. I did, though, appreciate the images I could create, which were the biggest reason that kept me going in the class. It was fantastic to see how complicated programming concepts like recursions could manifest in something as cool as these fractal images. And then in 2012, an interesting opportunity came along. A group of guys from the CS department were making a mobile app for the school cafeteria, so I jumped at the chance to join in. I was already a huge Apple fangirl, so the idea of making an app for the iPhone sounded fantastic. Luckily for me, Arc and Interface Builder were both already part of Xcode at that point, which significantly lowered the barriers to entry and sparked an instant connection. So from the moment I placed my first UI button on a view controller, control-dragged it to hook it up to a function, and changed that background color on touch-up inside, ran that app on a phone, I was hooked. I could play with something I made in code in the real world. Not only that, but the app we ended up building was actually really useful for other people. Using the web to check the menu was awful. It was difficult to find. You could only use it with Flash, and filtering it for your preferences was a nightmare. The app we created was much more accessible, usable, and useful. It let people see nutritional info with a tap of a button, filter foods based on dietary restrictions, and even favorite items and get notified on days they'd be available. And so this simple dining hall app called Delicious became a huge success and was used by over 50% of the campus. It was a major time saver for college students because it helped them plan their meals in advance. And it was a great tool to procrastinate with instead of writing that term paper. But not only did it help students, it helped professors as well, because they could now tell if they had to bring their lunch in or not. And last but not least, it helped parents rest assured that their child had some access to quality food. It was a very interesting crash course in understanding how different sets of people could use your app for different purposes, even ones you didn't predict or explicitly design for. So for me, it really underlined the importance of understanding your user base, their use cases, and making decisions driven by helping them reach their goals. So my love affair with mobile apps began. We started a whole new group called Grinnell App Dev that still exists to this day, and I spent the next 3 years working on a bunch of different iOS apps across development and design. And I ran the group until I graduated in 2015, and during that time, we took every opportunity to find a new app to make, a new problem to solve, a way to make things easier or more fun to use. We had a school newspaper app, an app for events, one for campus directory, even a game. We didn't do much research whether people actually wanted all of these apps. We just kind of made them because we could, because at that time, everything needed an app, right? Even if the answer was no, that was fine, because the point of the group was to learn how to make things and supplement the theoretical knowledge from the classroom with something practical. We weren't trying to save the world. But it was really gratifying to see people actually use and enjoy using the things you make. It gave us all the momentum and drive to keep going and improving. So soon I wanted more. I started having this gnawing desire to work on a real app to, solve big, meaty problems for lots of people. So my wish was granted when I got a job offer from a startup in New York called Rent the Runway right after graduation. The mobile team was pretty small, but everyone seemed really cool and, most importantly, passionate about what they were building. I was on a mission. I was going to join a team and help create a platform for a more sustainable way to consume fashion and democratize access to quality clothing through the sharing economy. I was going to change the world a little bit. Since day one, I was deep in the weeds of it. I started looking at some failing unit tests, and by the end of day one, I already made my first PR. And I quickly realized how little I actually knew about iOS development and engineering in general, which was very humbling. But I had the opportunity to learn while making an impact. So in my first year, I was learning exponentially. And soon, with the help of my team, I was thinking less about how to get things done and more about how to get things done in the right way, so it can last and be built upon. I started to think about design patterns and modular components and architecture and how terribly bloated some of our MVCs were. And it felt really great when we came up with this solid plan for our refactor that allowed us to delete all those crappy old files we had before and replace them with shiny new ones. Except that even the shiny new ones became obsolete pretty quickly. And this constant cycle of creating and deleting your work makes it hard for you to pinpoint at anything permanent that you've created. It's not like making a chair, for example. Every refactor means you have to say goodbye to all of the time, energy, and effort you put into that work previously. But not only that, it makes you look at your old work and find it lacking and bad. Don't get me wrong, I love sinking my teeth into cleaning up a code base. Refactoring from Objective-C to Swift is particularly satisfying. But I could feel that I was getting a little detached from my daily work and losing sight of how it mattered in the greater scheme of things. So, slowly but surely, my relationship with mobile started to change. One smaller reason was this constant cycle of creating and deleting your work, but another more important one was that the more I started thinking about the broader picture in terms of code and architecture and building things the right way, the more I started thinking about the broader picture of our app as a tool that women use to get dressed, and whether the features we were building and how we were building them were the right features to support that goal. One way to answer this question was to look at raw data of user behavior. As the team and the company grew, we spent a lot of time figuring out where to add pixels for each of these new features to get the data. And if you're not familiar with pixels, they're little bits of code that let you track what people are doing in the app. What button they tap on, what pages they scroll to, what they search for. You add pixels to understand how a user goes from opening the app to completing a conversion, like signing up or sharing things with friends or making a purchase. For example, when someone adds an item to their bag, you might fire a pixel similar to that one. Once you have this data, you can create flow funnels of all the steps users have to take from A to B, and then tweak the steps in between to remove any barriers and pain points along their way. One overarching goal for most apps is to increase engagement, and the holy grail is getting people to turn to your app when they're bored. And I'm all for data-driven decisions, but when you use that data to help users reach their goals in better, easier, or more efficient ways. When you use that data and shift from helping them to do what they want, to helping them do what you want, that's when things get a little tricky. So in 2008, Richard Taylor published a book called Nudged that outlined how to use behavioral psychology to get people to change their habits and actions. The idea was to help people make better decisions for themselves by providing helpful cues that increase intrinsic motivation to reach a goal, because motivation that comes from within you is much more potent than motivation that comes from the outside. For example, in the 1990s, they added this fly sticker to the urinals in the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam to improve cleanliness by reducing spillage. The hypothesis was that men were more likely to aim when going to the toilet if they saw a target, specifically one that they didn't like. And it worked. It actually reduced spillage by over 50%. On a more serious note, though, in 2010, the UK Behavioral Insights team, known as the Nudge Unit, used the principle of the theory to drive behavior change in public policy. They were able to get 6% more people to pay their overdue taxes just by adding this sentence at the top of the letter that they sent out. So mobile apps make great use of this technique as well. One of the most obvious uses are CTAs, otherwise known as buttons. In any app, you will often find at least a primary and a secondary button. The point is to make it very obvious for the user to understand where to tap for the most common use case. And in this case, this nudge is helpful The visual distinction helps users quickly identify what they have to do. Sometimes, though, these humble buttons can have a bit of a questionable undertone. For example, when going through this checkout flow, this button immediately screams, "Tap me," even though it's not even the checkout button. The actual checkout button actually happens under the fold. So this is an example of UX design that aims to trick and manipulate people because they think this is the one that's going to help them progress to the next step. And in this case, the nudge, which should be a value add, can lead to a negative outcome. And there's a term for this type of design. It's called dark UI or dark UX. And this one is a little sneaky, but I started noticing a bunch more similar patterns. For example, forcing the user into a flow that they can't get out of, making it necessary for them to complete it before they can continue with their usual way of using the app. Like the old Uber rating screen, they don't do this anymore. But there was no X or close button. Even if you force quit the app, you simply had to submit a rating before you could order a new ride. And while this dubious technique will definitely help you rack up more data points, you do have to ask yourself how valid they actually are. We implemented a similar technique at Rent the Runway to get feedback on clothing fit after customers returned their items. And there were many occasions when I saw employees just randomly tapping through the answers just to get out of the experience as fast as possible. So if our own employees were doing that, surely our users were as well. So instead of trapping the users completely, you could show a prominent reminder to do this somewhere on the home screen. You clearly outline the benefits to them for giving the feedback, like better personalization in the future, and provide easy access to the form so they can complete it on their own time. By allowing people to choose when they give you information, you're also ensuring that the data they give you is more accurate, deliberate, and considered. Another example is making it very hard or impossible to do something that should be simple in the fear of churn or, canceling. Like canceling a subscription. Have you ever noticed how few apps actually let you cancel a subscription inside the app itself? Not only that, but the instructions on how to do it are nowhere to be found. The app provides no hints or suggestions, and usually the user has to call customer service and endure a lengthy marketing conversation before they can cancel. But it is such a simple thing to implement. And as a developer, you probably make that REST call all the time to test. And on a side note, during one of the breaks today, I chatted about this example with a Spotify developer and found out that they do have this option on Android, but they're not allowed to offer in-app cancellation on iOS due to Apple's App Store subscription rules. Okay. So speaking of Apple, Apple itself has an awful UX process to cancel a subscription. It took me 8 steps to do it. And that is after I Googled how to, because I could not figure it out on my own. By making it so difficult to do something, it makes users lose trust in your service. If they want to churn, aka leave, they'll find a way to do so. And your efforts to make it harder will just make it less likely for them to return in the future. Transparency is key for retention. So maybe instead of hiding the cancel option, you can offer a pause option instead. That way you don't completely lose the user, and the user feels supported in their goals. So little by little, I started seeing all apps as a little bit suspicious. I started to pay attention to these manipulative dark UX tactics, and suddenly I could see them everywhere. I no longer considered the apps on my phone as truly helpful. I developed this professional deformation where I would download an app purely to dissect its flows and interactions and evaluate whether similar tactics could make sense for our app. I realized how pervasive mobile apps have become in my own life, and the negative effects on my increasing reliance on technology in general was having on my physical and mental well-being, how I thought, how I read, and how I learned things. I started to feel kind of trapped in the world of screens, and I was upset that I myself was contributing to the problem. And it didn't seem like I was the only one. A whole bunch of mindfulness and meditation apps started popping up. Apps to track your screen time, apps to help you with mental illness, and articles that encourage you to tweak your phone to use it less. Like this interview with Google's former design ethicist, Tristan Harris, which show you how to turn your phone to grayscale to combat phone addiction. But what was strange about this was, while all of these tools were trying to make you use your phone less, they lived on the phone itself. So, weren't we just trying to solve problems with the tools that caused them? How is that supposed to work? I started to resent mobile technology because it seemed like it was the crux of all of our problems. And then I saw this rant on the future of interaction design and our current vision for it. And the future, as of now, looks extremely flat. The article is both a criticism towards a screen-based future of tapping and swiping and sliding, and a passionate tribute to all the other things our hands can do that this screen-based future doesn't account for. Like push, pull, throw, squeeze, pick up a glass and immediately know whether it's empty or full. It gives an interesting definition of a tool. It says, a tool is something that addresses a need and amplifies a human capability. It turns what we can do, like hold a hammer, into something we want to do, like bang a nail to hang a picture. So if I'm working on an app that's supposed to be a tool, and I consciously decide to make the tool harder to use, it's not a very good tool, is it? All of these things combined really did a number on me, so I decided to quit my job because I felt like I was just part of perpetuating this problem, and I should instead go do something more meaningful and purposeful and physical for the real world, not this digital imitation. So I packed my bags, moved to London, and I started my master's course. Because when I went to their open house, they said something that was right up my alley at that time. We are not interested in irrelevant gadgets that don't bring value to people's lives. Bingo. In the course, there is an overarching belief that your hands can contribute more meaning, which lets you have an advantage over the screen. So the past year has been a whirlwind of scary and exciting and new physical making experiences. And ultimately, it's actually helped me reestablish a friendlier relationship with mobile. So my course focuses on learning through physical making and experimentation. Cool. I thought I'd be good at that because normally I would also learn by making. Sure, I was making stuff on a computer, but the principles seemed the same, right? Wrong. When you program, you have access to infinite knowledge and reference materials at the tip of your fingers. But there is no manual to tell you what workshop tool or materials to use. Do you use a bandsaw, hacksaw, chainsaw? What even is a lathe? That thing. When you prototype, you can use paper, cardboard, clay, straws, ropes, wires, wood, metal, anything in the world, literally. And to account for all of these materials and their potential interactions would be impossible. So, as I failed again and again because I couldn't just Google my questions or ask on Stack Overflow, I had to actually try them out. So lesson number 1. The world of making software and digital making of all kinds has an incredibly easy access to knowledge and information that significantly speeds up your ability to create. One of the first physical things I made was this rotating lamp tower called Shy Lamp. Now it's playing. It would light up and rotate when you were far away, but the moment you started getting closer, it would slowly stop, straighten up, and turn off. It involved a lot of parts and a lot of laser cutting. And when you laser cut, you make one digital SVG file and then expect the laser cutter to cut a bunch of pieces that match exactly. But that's not actually what ends up happening. necessarily, because the wood might have a grain, or the laser gets stuck, or burns through one side a little more than the other. So some of these teeth fit together nicely, some were way too loose, and others just didn't fit at all. And I had no control over that. So lesson number 2, software is predictable. You are in control. If you write the same code twice, you can expect it to behave in exactly the same way, most of the time. So the interaction of that same lamp was driven by an Arduino Uno microcontroller and some simple code. It was all up and running until it wasn't. Absolutely nothing changed with the code or the parts. My computer just suddenly stopped seeing the Arduino's port. And I restarted it, unplugged it, replugged it, downloaded all the drivers, anything I could think of. But in the end, I just couldn't figure it out, and neither could my tutors. And they were just kind of okay with this remaining an unsolvable mystery. But I wasn't. So lesson number 3, software is solvable. If there's a problem in your code, you can get down to like the nittiest, grittiest bits with a debugger and find that bug. It might be hard and it might take a long time, but you can rest assured that you can ultimately get to the bottom of it. Another thing that went wrong with this lamp, there were many problems, was I kept forgetting about physics. I just wanted these blocks to move on top of each other, basically. But as I went from sketches to physical manifestation, I realized it's quite difficult to make something static while others are rotating in this constrained box environment. So in order to make my blocks into these like beautiful vessels of light that I imagined, they ended up having to have 5 wooden rods stuck through them, and 4 metal pipes in between each level, and another little bit to keep the gears in place. So, lesson number 4. Software is simply possible, even when it's impossible. You can pretty much create anything you want. You can make up your own rules and let your imagination run wild. Another one of my projects was this chair, which gave me a whole new meaning for the phrase "at scale," because I was making stuff for human scale. And trying to make this chair at scale immediately would be silly and extremely expensive. So we started off by making these small 1 to 5 prototypes so we could iterate quickly, they said. And as I was looking at these prototypes, I started thinking, I wonder how it would look like if I moved that one bar a little to the left, or changed that angle a little bit, or another small little alteration like that. And all I could think about in that moment was, I really wish there was a copy and paste in the real world. But there's not. You just have to build it again, which requires double the time and double the resources. So, lesson number 5. Software is fast and cheap. You can copy and paste code and change a little bit here and a little bit there, and quickly compare and contrast both solutions side by side to evaluate which one is better. I think you can slowly see where I'm going with this. Ever since I started the course, basically, I kept on hitting these roadblocks that I never really had to face before when I was dealing with software. And as each of these realizations hit me, I started to really appreciate what technology lets us do. But nowhere did this become more apparent than when, in March, we went on a research trip to Nairobi, Kenya. We went there for 3 weeks to collaborate with the Nairobi Design Institute and try helping them come up with solutions for issues related to waste management practices and sexual and reproductive health. This was my first time in East Africa, and it was very, very different from what I've ever seen before. The most unexpected thing, though, was the prevalent use of mobile technology. Everyone has a phone, from the slums to Nairobi Central. In Kibera or Dandora, 2 of the largest slums in Nairobi, most people don't have a shower or a toilet in their home, but they have a mobile phone. There's actually a kind of mini mobile revolution happening in a lot of African countries right now. They kind of skipped computers and went straight to mobile. Mobile money, in particular, is insanely popular through a service called M-Pesa. Mobile money transactions are actually equivalent to around 50% of Kenya's GDP and growing year over year. So I was sitting in an Uber, and we were heading to a tea farm, and I got bored, so I started asking my driver about his life, work, phones. And when he started talking about his phone and the M-Pesa app, his face lit up. He was talking my ears off about how amazing the service was because it allowed him to send money directly to his wife in Uganda, and how easy it was, and how an app that does something well spreads like wildfire, and that he wants more apps to do more things, and if we can make them, we just should as soon as possible. In fact, at the end of our research trip, many of the groups came up with mobile apps as the best solution for their problem briefs. One, for example, was an app for garbage collectors to divvy up turfs, so they didn't have to waste time and gas driving around. And another one was a way for teenagers to discreetly order sexual and reproductive health products, because even bringing up the SRH topic out loud is extremely taboo. In both the cases, a mobile app was absolutely the perfect solution, because it was easy for people to get, since it lives on a device that is so ubiquitous and essential in people's day-to-day lives. Any physical solution would take months or years to develop, manufacture, and distribute, and even more time to upgrade, change, fix, or evolve. So, last but not least, lesson number 6 is that mobile apps are insanely available because they're easy to distribute, obtain, and upgrade. Sure, you may have to wait a day or two for Apple to review your binary, but after that, there can be a million copies of your app out there in a matter of seconds. So, this is all to say, I was wrong. Mobile apps and phones are not evil, nor the root of all of our problems. They're actually very enabling, powerful, and creative ways to solve problems, and we should be proud and humbled that we have the ability to create them. The key, though, is that we have to create and use them responsibly and take ownership and agency of how they fit into our lives. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if we have time for questions. Sure, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them now or later. Okay, I feel like everyone's tired. Cool, thank you.